Los Angeles Convention Center, April 15, 1989. Saturday afternoon, 3:45 p.m. The backstage corridor is narrow, lined with concrete walls painted institutional beige. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. The air smells of cleaning solution and sweat. This is where reputations are built and sometimes quietly dismantled. Down this corridor stands Cynthia Rothrock, five-time world karate champion, black belt in Tang Soo Do, Taekwondo, Eagle Claw, and Northern Shaolin. Her films, China O'Brien and China O'Brien 2, have made her the most recognizable female action star in America. When people think of women in martial arts, they think of Cynthia Rothrock. She stands with her back against the wall, arms crossed. Her competition uniform is crisp, her blonde hair pulled back tight. Everything about her communicates discipline, control, and the quiet confidence that comes from winning repeatedly. 15 feet down the corridor, surrounded by organizers and translators, is Jet Li, 26 years old, recently arrived from China. Five-time national wushu champion, star of Shaolin Temple. But here in Los Angeles, he is still relatively unknown to the American martial arts establishment. Some have heard stories about impossible speed and supernatural precision, but stories are just stories until proven. Cynthia has heard them too. Over the past week, multiple people mentioned this young man from China. "Wait until you see Jet Li," they said. She listened politely but remained skeptical. She has seen hundreds of demonstration artists, beautiful forms, impressive acrobatics. But when it comes to practical application, performance rarely translates. She learned this through years of tournament fighting. The convention has been running for 2 days. Demonstrations from masters representing dozens of styles, thousands of attendees. This is where reputations are either confirmed or questioned. But what nobody in that hallway knew was that Cynthia had made a decision that morning. If the opportunity presented itself, she would test this Jet Li personally. Not in front of cameras, but in the way martial artists have tested each other for centuries. Directly. Honestly. Now, 15 minutes before Jet Li is scheduled to go on stage, that opportunity has arrived. The corridor is relatively quiet. 2 event organizers, a translator, a photographer from Black Belt magazine, and Cynthia Rothrock watching this young man as he centers himself before his performance. She pushes off from the wall and walks toward him. The organizers glance up, sense something in her body language, and their conversation trails off. The photographer quietly raises his camera, not shooting yet, just ready. Cynthia stops 6 feet from Jet Li. He looks up, makes eye contact, and something passes between them. Cynthia speaks first. Her voice is calm, but carries an edge. "I've heard a lot about your demonstrations. They say your wushu is very impressive." She pauses. "But demonstrations are choreographed. I'm curious about your practical application, your real technique." The translator begins to interpret, but Jet Li raises his hand slightly, indicating he understands. "I appreciate your interest. Wushu is both art and application. Demonstration shows the art, but the principles remain the same. Principles are theoretical. I'm interested in what happens when technique meets resistance." She looks directly into his eyes. "I've competed in full-contact tournaments for 15 years. I've faced opponents who wanted to hurt me. Real fighters, real intent. That's how I know my techniques work. How do you know yours work?" The real tension was just beginning to build in that narrow hallway. The organizers shifted uncomfortably. This was a challenge, delivered politely but unmistakably from one champion to another. Jet Li's expression doesn't change. No anger, no defensiveness. He simply listens and responds with calm. "Testing technique is important. I agree. How would you like to test?" Cynthia gestures to the corridor. "Here, now. Nothing formal. Just an exchange. You show me your defensive technique. I'll deliver a combination. Real speed, real intention. If your wushu works the way people claim, you'll handle it. The translator's eyes widen, but Jet Li speaks first. I accept. One combination. You attack, I respond, then we finish. Agreed? Cynthia nods once. Agreed. What happened in the next 4 seconds would be recounted differently depending on who was asked, but everyone present agreed on certain details. The corridor became completely silent. The organizers stepped back. The photographer's camera remained lowered. Cynthia took 3 steps back, rolled her shoulders once, and settled into a ready position. Not a demonstration stance, a fighting stance. Jet Li stood where he was. He didn't adjust his position, didn't raise his hands into a guard. He simply stood, breathing normally, watching Cynthia with absolute focus. To anyone unfamiliar with martial arts, he looked unprepared. To those who understood, his stillness was more unnerving than any aggressive posture. Cynthia moved. She closed the distance in 2 quick steps and delivered a combination that had won her championships. A low lead leg round kick to the calf, followed immediately by a straight right punch to the sternum, followed by a left hook aimed at the jawline. 3 strikes in rapid succession, each delivered with tournament speed and genuine intent. Those who were there remember one detail above all others. They remember not seeing Jet Li's hands move. They remember Cynthia's kick traveling toward his leg, and then somehow, without visible motion, Jet Li's right hand was there, making contact with her shin. Just enough pressure, and her kick continued past him. They remember her straight punch coming forward, and Jet Li's left hand appearing, just touching her forearm, redirecting the line by 2 inches, and the punch traveled into empty space. They remember her hook coming fast, and Jet Li's body shifting, just a slight rotation, and the hook passed through the space where his head had been. The entire combination took maybe 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, Cynthia Rothrock, who had defeated hundreds of opponents with that exact combination, landed nothing. Not because Jet Li blocked aggressively, but because he had read every movement before it fully developed, had positioned his hands and body with such precise timing that her techniques simply found no target. But what made the moment truly remarkable was what Jet Li did next. As Cynthia's hook passed by his head, his right hand moved forward in a straight line toward her throat. Not a punch, just an extended finger strike, classical wushu technique, traveling with impossible speed. And then it stopped. 1 inch from her throat, perfect control, perfect distance, perfect demonstration that if this had been actual combat, the exchange would have ended differently. Cynthia froze, not because she was afraid. She froze because in that moment, she understood something that stories could never convey. The speed was not exaggeration, the precision was not performance. Jet Li had just dealt with her championship combination as if he had seen it 1,000 times before, and his counter had been delivered with control that required more skill than simply striking. The silence stretched. Jet Li slowly lowered his hand, stepped back, and gave a small, respectful nod. Cynthia remained in position, breathing steady, processing what had occurred. Then she straightened and did something that only true martial artists are capable of doing. She bowed, deep, formal, acknowledging mastery. When she straightened, she spoke quietly. I've faced 5-time world champions. I've trained with the best martial artists in America. I've never seen anyone read techniques that fast. She paused. What you just did? That's not demonstration. That's real skill. Jet Li responded, his words carrying weight. You have excellent technique, very strong, very fast. I simply practice different method. Not better, not worse, just different principle. Same respect for the art. One of the organizers finally found his voice. Mr. Li, you're on stage in 10 minutes. Jet Li nodded, then turned back to Cynthia. After my demonstration, perhaps we talk more? Share technique? Share principle? Cynthia smiled, genuine warmth replacing the skepticism. I'd like that. I have a lot of questions. As Jet Li walked toward the stage entrance, Cynthia remained in the corridor. The photographer approached carefully. Ms. Rothrock, I didn't shoot any of that. It felt private. But what just happened? Cynthia looked at him, deciding how much to say. What happened is I learned everything I heard about Jet Li was true. And I learned I still have things to learn. She paused. And that's a good thing. Her posture had changed. The skepticism was gone. In its place was curiosity, respect, and the excitement that comes from discovering people who can show you something you haven't seen before. Later that evening, after both demonstrations concluded, Cynthia and Jet Li sat in a quieter section with translators and colleagues. They discussed technique, philosophy, training methods. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, marked by mutual respect and genuine curiosity. The story of what happened in that backstage corridor was never officially recorded. No photographs exist, no video footage. The people who were there told others, quietly, carefully. Some dismissed it as exaggeration. But Cynthia Rothrock, when asked years later, would occasionally reference that day. She never sensationalized the moment, but she would say, with quiet conviction, that Jet Li showed her something she hadn't seen before, and it changed her understanding of what was possible. For Jet Li, the moment was simply one of many where he was asked to prove his wushu was more than performance. He rarely discussed such encounters publicly, but those close to him knew he carried deep respect for Cynthia Rothrock, not because she had challenged him, but because she had done so honestly and been gracious in acknowledging what she experienced. April 15, 1989. A backstage corridor. Fluorescent lights. Concrete walls. 2 champions. One moment that lasted 4 seconds but contained years of training, discipline, and mutual respect. No cameras, no audience, just skill meeting skill, and both people walking away with something gained.